rabbits, and I think we can see it. All right, don't worry, class. If you cannot read this all, I know some of the writing is pretty small. If you have trouble reading it, don't worry. I will be sending this board to everyone, so you won't have a problem with it, okay? All right, well, welcome, micro students. This is our last video. Technically, it's our last class, and for me as well, it's probably my last class at Baker after all these years and all these thousands of, shall we say, satisfied, hopefully, customers. Anyway, so you are my last class, and this is it. So here we are. This is basically what we have gone over this semester. A lot of it you should already have in your notes. A lot of it is from before we switched to online. A lot of this was already on the board, but I'm bringing up the highlights, the high points, things that you absolutely should remember, and things that I'd like you to take away from this class. Okay. So we'll take it from here. And as you know, we started the very first class, we started with the idea of what? Scarcity. We said every single, no matter how far you go in economics, every single economics class has to start out with this idea of scarcity. And what is it? Scarcity. Well, it is basically the fact that everything in our world is in limited supply. All resources are limited. We have limited resources facing a world of unlimited wants, all right? Limited resources facing a world of unlimited wants. So what does this force us to do? Well, since everything is limited, even your time, energy is limited, it forces us to make decisions. We have to decide, am I going to do this or am I going to do that? And the word decision actually comes from the old ancient Greek word to cut off. And what are we cutting off? Well, when we decide, we are cutting off all other options, okay? And all the other options, everything else that we didn't choose, economists call those are our opportunity costs, what we didn't choose, okay? I think we mentioned the value of our second best choice. If we really wanted to put a number on it, that would be our opportunity cost. But we have to be careful because opportunity costs can involve a lot of different things. It could be not only explicit money going out, but it can also be foregone income, okay? So, for instance, when you were in class, the money that it cost you for gas to drive to class, so you could consider that, well, that was what money you spent in class. But when you were in class for 2-3 hours. You were giving up all that time. You could have been earning money. That's foregone income, okay? Okay, so we have to always add all these opportunities that we gave up together and come up with a firm number, okay? So, opportunity cost, what I gave up. The total, your cost, and your foregone income, okay? Then we went to our favorite, supply and demand. Remember, price and quantity. Demand slopes down. There is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. As the price goes up, the quantity, remember, quantity demanded is slightly different than demand. Demand is the whole curve. Quantity demanded is 1 point. But as the price goes up, the quantity demanded will go down. So inverse relation, and we have supply, a positive relationship. So if you're making this stuff, whatever it is, If the price is going up, you're happy about that. So you will increase the quantity supplied. All right? So that's going up. Where they meet is called equilibrium. That's the big E in economics, equilibrium. It gives us an equilibrium price and bring it down and an equilibrium quantity. At equilibrium, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. Okay? So when we are at equilibrium, that equilibrium price is going to give us a quantity supplied and a quantity demanded point that they're equal. All right? Okay. So what happens if we're not at equilibrium? Just like life, it doesn't stay at equilibrium all the time. Well, if the price had floated up, we would have too much being made because the price is high, but you folks who are demanders, you don't want that much. And so you would cut back on your purchasing, but there would be more being made. However, if they say, well, if there was a surplus, how much is going to be bought? Well, it's very simple. Even if there is a surplus, doesn't mean you're buying it, right? Okay, so let's say there was at a surplus price. The price was way up here. Well, it's still, remember I kept talking about we bring it across to see where it hits? Well, we bring it across and boom, it hits the demand curve right there. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's a surplus. It doesn't really matter how much this surplus is, how big this surplus is. The amount that's going to be bought is the point where it hits the demand curve, right? So even if there's a surplus, it's the quantity demanded. That's the amount that's going to be bought. In the reverse, you could also talk about a shortage. Well, if there was a shortage, now there's you folks making the stuff. You're not too thrilled about the low price, all right? Perhaps you can't, remember we talked about you can't run all your equipment because it's not all the same, and at a really low price, your less efficient machinery, you'd have to put aside, you have to run just your best, so you would be running less. Anyway, at a shortage, how much is going to be made, same thing, you just bring it across and boom, where it hits the supply curve, that's it. The suppliers aren't going to make more. Okay, even though the demand is way out here. So if there's a surplus, how much is going to be bought? Easy. You just bring it across. It's how much is going to be demanded at that high price. It's not going to be very much, but that's it. Okay? All right, so it's like the buck stops here. And brother, it does. All right, that brings us to elasticity. Remember we talked about elasticity. One word, responsiveness. Remember, we were talking about opportunity cost, what I gave up. And we also should bring up marginal. That was a big term that we talked about a lot. Marginal, one more, one additional, marginal cost, one more additional cost, marginal revenue or benefit or utility, whatever you want to call it. All right? One more. Whenever you're doing one more, you get a marginal benefit and we get a marginal cost. Okay, now, typically in micro, especially if we're dealing in firms, we talk about marginal revenue, okay? But it's the same thing. And what are we doing when we're making these decisions? We're saying, all right, what should I do here? I have to make these decisions. What am I trying to do? Basically, what you're trying to do when you make a decision, it's not that difficult. You're trying to just generate as much happiness, joy, utility, benefit, whatever you want to call it, that this small or medium or large decision is going to give you. All right? So how do we do that? Well, remember we said the optimization point is where our marginal cost is equal to our marginal benefit. When those two are equal, that's our optimization point. And it's true for you and I, it's true for consumers, and as we're going to see in a second, it's true for producers. It's how much you consume, that's going to be your optimization point for consumption, and it's your optimization point for production, okay? I like that because it cuts across economics pretty well. There's not a whole lot of facts in economics or laws that don't have all other things being equal, or yes, but if this happened, or usually, or typically. That's one that kind of cuts across economics. All right, so we move into elasticity. And again, elasticity is responsiveness. Responding to what? Well, the biggest elasticity that we look at is elasticity of demand. How much does your demand respond when the price changes? Okay? Now, we said a second ago that when the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. So now all we're doing is we're taking it one step further. We're saying, okay, we know it goes down, but now we're asking, well, by how much does it go down? Does it go down by a little? Does it go down by a lot? Or if it was an absolute item that you had to buy, or God forbid you would die or something got off or what happened to you, you'd buy it anyway, no matter what the price, then there would be no response. There would be no change in your quantity demanded. So we go from totally inelastic, which would be zero, going all the way up to just under 1. And as it got more and more towards 1, it would start looking like this. But as we see, it's a straight line up and down. There's no movement sideways. Remember, x-axis is quantity. There is no quantity. We're not moving sideways. The only way we're moving is price, up and down. Totally inelastic. This is a one-to-one relationship, or unitary elasticity. You know, you raise your price 10%, you lose 10 units, or it doesn't have to be exactly number, but it's always the same percentage. You let's say, for simplicity's sake, let's say you raise your price 10%, you lose 10% of your business. It's a one-to-one ratio, a consistent one-to-one ratio, all right? That's unitary. Then we have very elastic, which is almost a horizontal line, and then totally elastic, which would mean going out to infinity, which would be a flat line, which we'll be getting into in just a second when we talk about perfect competition, okay? So, under 1, inelastic. That means if you're selling something, hey, guess what? If you're going to raise your price, people are generally going to buy it anyway. So if the price is, if the demand is inelastic, you're not as afraid to raise your price. If it's unitary, that means, well, it's just one-to-one. You know, you raise the price, you lose some business. If it's elastic, that's where you have to be careful about raising your price. You don't want to raise your price if you can avoid it. In fact, what you might be doing is you might be doing some cost studies in your business to see if you can lower the price, because you're going to get the bigger bang for your buck, because you're going to get a huge response by lowering the price a little bit. Okay? That's what, and we talked about oligopolists. I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's where, you know, oligopolists, when they look at each other, the price leader, if he raises his price, are they gonna jump in? No, they want to see how elastic that demand is when the price leader raises his price. So they may hold back and watch what that oligopolist is doing. But if the oligopolist lowers his or her price, typically they're going to follow suit because they don't want to lose market share. All right, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This is my last class. Give me a break. All right. We said savings equal to investment. Remember, and we talked about this, nothing is done in isolation in economics. It's like the old saying, what goes around comes around. It's especially true when we talk about macroeconomics, but it's also true in microeconomics. So if we see that, all right, in this sector of the economy, in this savings area of the economy, gee whiz, the savings seem to have gone up. But at the same time, they say, hey, the national savings rate is down. Well, it doesn't take an economic genius to figure out, well, if one sector of savings is up a bit, but overall savings is down, then you know that some other sector in the savings category has to be negative or has to be down, to counterbalance it, all right? Small example of what goes wrong comes wrong, all right? Anyway, moving on, remember, total revenue, real toughie. How much did you do last year? Oh, we did $8 million. Oh, great. Now, you're not saying whether you made or lost any money yet, but you say, well, how did you get to $8 million? It's real tough. It's a real tough equation. It's how much did you sell times the price. So total revenue is quantity times price. Now, if your total revenue, quantity times price, if it's greater than your total cost, guess what? You made a profit. If your total revenue, quantity times price, is less than your total cost, well, then you lost money, okay? Now, and this is important, and I know we talked about this a bit, but we are talking about accounting profits. Accounting profits just have to do with actual dollars going out, actual money going out that you're spending, okay? It doesn't, here, you buy something, okay, that's an explicit cost. That's what accounting costs are all about, all right? Economic costs are just a little bit more involved. They do include what money has gone out explicitly, but they also have what is called implicit costs, okay, or your opportunity costs. So, accounting profits, they don't include opportunity costs. So if you made an accounting profit, since it doesn't include opportunity costs, we couldn't say for sure whether you're making an economic profit or not, or breaking even, okay? Because the economist says, okay, well, to the accountant, you made money, but you just use your explicit costs. We're going to use those, but we're also going to include our implicit costs, meaning what I could have done with all the assets that you used to, pull off a certain program or do something. You spent this much money on machinery, people, whatever, whatnot, explicitly, but also we have to take into account what you could have done with that equipment, those people, all of a sudden, and that's your opportunity cost. So economic costs are always higher, okay? So, accounting profits do not include opportunity costs. All right. But it's not so bad when you talk about, and this is one thing that I had trouble with for a long time, when you talk about, in the long run, they're breaking even economically. I'm thinking, breaking even economically, geez, that sounds god-awful. I mean, when you're in your careers, if someone says to you, well, for the last 4 or 5 years, guess what, you broke even. That doesn't sound all that great. But that would be if it was strictly accounting-wise. But if you say you broke even economically speaking, that means you took care of all your explicit costs, you took care of all your implicit, all your opportunity costs, you paid yourself. In other words, you got back anything else that you could have done with your time and energy and all the assets that you used. All those opportunity costs you recovered. So breaking even economically isn't quite so bad. All right? Okay. In addition to explicit costs, actual money going out, and implicit costs, which are typically the opportunity costs, we have what is called sunken costs. And that's cost that you've already spent. You've already spent the money. It's gone. They are sunk. Let them sink. Forget about them. And I think we talked about this in life. Unfortunately, all of us are going to run through a couple of big bumps in the road. Those are sunken costs. If you've already gone through them, don't look back and keep harping on them, saying, oh, I wasted this much time and effort and money and this, and keep reliving it. Those are sunken costs. You let them sink. Don't take them into account any longer. Move forward. Cut the chains from those sunken costs and let them go. All right? All right. So, again, just like life, forget them, let them go, let them sink. Sunken costs, they're gone. Not going to retrieve them, so don't harp on them. Don't harp on the old mistakes that you made. Learn from them. Say, okay, I learned something, and I move on, and then you forget it. Let them sink. All right. Okay, now, speaking of costs, we have total costs. We break it down into variable cost and fixed cost, okay? Now, if I take my total cost and I subtract, oddly enough, variable cost, I have what is known as fixed costs. Fixed costs you have, whether you run one part, 100,000 parts, 1,000,000 parts, you've got your fixed cost, all right? You took out a big mortgage on this big building, you did some big equipment loans with Bank of America or something, you bought 10 machining centers. You've got that nut to crack every month, whether those machines are running or not, okay? That's your fixed cost, okay? It doesn't change with production. Now, if we divide total cost, variable cost, and fixed cost by, whatever quantity you're running, okay? We come up with average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost, okay? So, if we see average fixed cost, and if your average fixed cost, if it was $10,000 and and let's say you ran 5,000, then your average fixed cost would be what? 5 divided goes into 10 would be $2. All right, or all you have to do is take the quantity and divide it. And that will give you your average. Now, the first one we came to is perfect competition. Here we have, as I was saying, we had not just almost, we have a perfectly horizontal demand curve, okay? But remember, this is not only our demand, it's also our price, it's our price line, it's our demand curve, and it's our marginal revenue curve. You can make as much as you want. It's up to you. And this marginal revenue curve is going to tell you how much how much more revenue you're making. You make one more, you make one more. All right. Now, you've got your marginal cost, which it slopes down at the very beginning, but for the most part, marginal cost slopes up, okay, because of diminishing marginal returns. It's also going to be your supply curve, okay? Just like the demand curve here, the straight line, it's also going to be your marginal revenue curve. So where do you maximize your profits? Where your marginal cost equals your marginal revenue, right there. Now, that's where you're going to maximize your profit, or if you're losing money, minimize your cost. So then we have to bring in, where does this average total cost curve come in? If the average total cost curve is way up here, much higher than our price, then we're losing money. If it's right on it, we're breaking even economically, again, not too bad. And if it's below it, then you're making money, okay? All right. So, now we're going to not so perfect competition. Remember, perfect competition. Then we have the two imperfect competitions. Oligopoly, which is a handful of producers, interdependent, a related item. They try to differentiate the item. you know, through advertising, so on and so forth. They have that kinked demand curve, as we were talking about just a couple minutes ago, with a handful of producers. You know, they're in that little wiggle room they have, but if the price leader decides to raise the price, the other oligopolists are going to sit back and say, well, let's see if that takes. If it takes, fine, they'll go and follow suit. But if it doesn't, and that price leader starts losing market share big time, then they're going to have to rescind the price increase. However, if the oligopolist lowers the price, the other rule of thumb, the other oligopolists are going to follow suit because they don't want to lose market share. Okay? That's not an adult beverage, by the way. Okay. My children have cleaned me out of those. I'll have to restock after this lesson's over. Okay. So, even in not so perfect competition, and then aside from oligopoly, you have monopolistic competition, which is many producers like fast food companies, thousands of them. Not quite as many as perfect, but again, similar product. They try to differentiate it. Do they have some price control? Yeah, they have some market power, okay? Some market power. Perfect competition, you have no market power. You are a price, what? You're a price taker. You take the price, right here, boom, you take that price as given. If you try, you know, the only thing, I mean, if you tried to raise your price, you're going to lose business because, you know, in perfect competition, you're a price taker. All the products are similar, okay? So since they're all similar, your price better be the same because price is going to be very important to the customers, okay? So, you can decide how much you're going to make, okay? You can decide how much you're going to make as moving along the marginal revenue curve, okay? But you are a price taker. Okay, but not so perfect competition, you do have some market power. Going all the way to the other extreme is monopoly. You have total market power. Okay, but again, doesn't matter. All four types, the optimization point is still where your marginal cost is equal to your marginal revenue. Okay, so Here we have our graph, and I know we've gone over this before. The demand curve is down. Let's say this is a monopolist. His marginal revenue is split off the demand curve. So what does this mean? Well, it means that where his marginal cost hits his marginal revenue is right here. Okay? So that's the quantity that this monopolist wants to make. All right? Now, but you say, well, is he making money? Is he losing money? Well, in this case, look, he's here and he can bring that price all the way up to the demand curve. So he's not only making money, he's making a lot of money. All right? And he can bring it down to his average total cost to find out what his regular profits would be. Now, anything below that would be his costs, okay? So you got, this would be his cost, this would be his profit, this would be what the super profits, all right? Okay, main thing to remember about a monopolist, and this is true about others too, in varying degrees. What do? They cut back on the quantity. Why? So they can raise the price. They don't hit a price here, they have the price up here. Okay? Now, generally, when we talk about economies of scale, I know we were talking about some monopolists enjoy increasing economies of scale. I had an old professor who said, well, economies of scale just means the general advantages of bigness. Okay? And for the most part, that does hold true, okay? As you get bigger, things things are cheaper. You can buy your costs are less. You can buy in more bulk. You can duplicate certain items that you don't have to start from scratch on each one. There's just a whole arena of things that save you money. However, in the long run, all right, you have your long run average total cost will go down, and then it will start going back up. So you can go too far. If it's going down in the beginning, let's say you're buying machining centers for $1 million each. You say, well, how many should I buy? You know, I've got some orders here from GM, Ford, Chrysler. Well, let's say you buy 3. Now 3 is okay, but you could have bought more because now you're running 7 days a week, you're shipping, you've got all sorts of extra shipping costs. So you were enjoying increasing returns to scale or economies to scale, all right? If you kept going and got maybe 5 or 6 machines, that would bring you to constant returns to scale. If you went too far and your costs now are rising, all right, that is decreasing returns to scale or diseconomies of scale. You went too far. You bought 10 machining centers, and yeah, you had business, but you have business for 8.5 machining centers. So you've got 1.5 machining centers. So you have $1.5 million worth of capital equipment sitting idle. You've gone too far. Okay. So if you see these costs going up, you've gone too far, and you are experiencing decreasing returns to scale. Economies of scale. All right. Let's see. Monopolist makes less, charges more, always low, marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Government intervention. Yes, governments try to prevent, first of all, they try to prevent monopolies. If they can't prevent them, they try to control them. And if they can't, if they have trouble doing that, then sometimes they decide to become one themselves. But let's face it, typically government, when they become a monopoly, it's never very successful. Why? Because they don't have to worry about costs. They don't have to worry about another competitor coming in, all right? When you don't have those 2 major worries that a private company does, it's not that you get I don't want to use the word sloppy, but you're not as quite efficient as you might be. You can't help it, okay? All right. So anyway, government intervention, they will step in, remember, to prevent anti-competitive action or any kind of restriction to trade, okay? They broke up, for instance, in the 80s, they broke up AT&T. They thought, well, that was, having one company was just anti-competitive. And at first blush, people thought, oh, that was a mistake. AT&T is doing a fine job. But then we started to realize all the benefits that we got when they had smaller companies. So it really was a good thing for us, okay? So in general, in dealing with monopoly, government intervention will, what do we say monopolies try to do? They try to cut back on the quantity to raise the price. Well, government intervention is just the opposite. They're going to try to intervene to lower the price and increase the quantity. Okay? Now, in terms of oligopolists, that's a handful of companies, in the industry. This Hirschman index, all they're doing is they're squaring the amount of market share you've got and adding it all up. 2,500 and below would be fairly competitive. 50 below 1,500 would be really, really competitive. But anything 2,500 or below would be considered fairly competitive. If you got way up, if the number got way up, for instance, if one company had, the majority of the market share and you square it, that's going to give you a pretty big number, okay? Then the government would start looking at that as being non-competitive. Okay. Then we come to the economics of poverty. Again, poverty line is that line, or threshold is that line of goods or services that you just what you need to just barely survive. All right, that is the poverty line. It is the amount of income, whatever the amount of income that you need to buy the absolute, and we're just talking the absolute barest necessities of life. That's your poverty threshold, your poverty line. Below it, you are considered poor. Okay? And God bless you all. I'm sure you're all going to have great careers, so none of you will be in that situation. But anyway, for some, unfortunately, a lot of folks, that is true. All right? We spend a lot of money on poverty programs. It's a little disheartening when you look at the total numbers spent, but God willing, better days are coming. As they are with this stupid virus. Okay, income inequality. We have the Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient broke society down into 5 sectors, okay? Well, if one sector has, more income, if you have 5 sectors and each one has 20% of the income, that's a fairly, that's a very well dispersed income for your society. There's not any inequality. However, that typically doesn't happen. So you'll usually find, let's say the upper, let's break instead of 5, we'll say upper, middle, and lower incomes. If the upper gets more, what'll happen? Well, inequality will get worse. But it doesn't absolutely mean that the poverty is going to change. The inequality could change, and yet the poverty level could stay the same. All right, that's one. You can argue probably a couple of ways, but again, this is economics. Okay. All right, now moving on, we're getting into bonds and stocks. Bonds, our IOUs have to be paid back. Government bonds, corporate bonds, whatever. Stocks, that is actual partial ownership of the company, okay? Now, nice thing about stock, it does not have to be paid back as a bond does. But what is the drawback to a stock? Well, if you start issuing lots and lots of shares of stock, let's say you're holding 100,000 shares and that's giving you majority stake in the company. Well, if you start issuing more shares and sell them to various shareholders, that 100,000 shares, perhaps it represented 60% of the company, but if you keep adding more shares, it's called diluting, the shares in terms of control of the company. So you might go from 60% down to 55 or 52, but you want to stay at 51. All right, so adding more shares, you don't have to pay the shares back, but it weakens your control or dilutes your stock. All right? This is a pretty, they had a little trouble with this on the first go around. Financial intermediaries, and this is so obvious, I don't know how you can mix this up. It brings the savers, okay, and the borrowers together. And since they're in between, they call them financial intermediaries. All right. Brings us to pollution. We had all different ways, there could be just an environmental standard of pollution. What's the best way? Well, a lot of times they came up with the idea that a pollution tax was more efficient. Why? Well, if you look at a company and they say, okay, this is the pollution tax. we consider that tax as like a marginal cost, okay? It's flat because it's just a flat tax. Now, we got our marginal revenue coming down, and where does the profit maximizing firm go to? Well, they go to where your marginal revenue is equal to your marginal cost. So they say that pollution tax is more efficient because the producer will, keep going as long as he can stay under, his marginal cost, which is that tax, right? Okay. Too Big to Fail is a great movie. I sometimes show it for some of my macro classes. It was about the housing bubble and how a number of investment banks would invested way too many mortgage-backed securities, that when the housing prices fell and coupled that with the default rate going up, these things started, it was like a house of cards coming down, resulting in the 2007, 2008, beginning of the Great Recession, all right? And they blame that a lot on deregulation of the banking industry. That was a real toughie. That could have brought, and it almost did, brought the economy down. All right? We go into the four kinds of good. Public goods. They're non-arrival and they're non-excludable. National defense. I can't, exclude you from enjoying national defense if you come over and visit me from Canada, and by you coming over, I'm not enjoying national defense any less, so it's non-liable in consumption. Club goods. Well, like pay-per-view TV, it is excludable. But once I pay for, let's say I pay for a rent a movie, does it matter if I have 3 friends or if I can find five friends? Does it matter if I have 3 friends or 5 friends over? No. So it's not going to be rival in consumption. Common resource, non-excludable, right? Remember, if we all had a little summer cottage up north on an inland lake, we all had rights to fish. Well, you or I, we couldn't exclude someone else in class who had a little summer house from fishing. The problem is, it could be overfished. There is rivalry in consumption, but you can't exclude it. I mean, you can't stop them from enjoying it. Finally, a private good, that is the most efficient. There's rivalry in consumption, and it is excludable, right? But as I think we mentioned, there's no inefficiencies in production or consumption in a private good. Externalities, that is a positive or a negative. Typically when people think about externalities, they're always thinking negative. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative. For instance, right now, the research that they're doing, that they're coming up, looks like they're making some good progress with a vaccine. Would that be getting everybody vaccinated? Well, yeah, that would be a wonderful positive externality, because not only is the person being vaccinated is going to be safe, he'll probably prevent the disease from spreading. So vaccinations would be examples of positive externalities. Typically, though, we think of negative externalities. And here's the whole thing. We look at a negative externality. Here's our basic supply and demand curve. You typically, you look at your internal cost, okay? But there is also a social cost that you may very well not be taking into consideration, okay? So perhaps you are making, let's say we go back to 1915 and you're making steel like crazy. Well, you're taking into consideration your internal costs, but you certainly are not taking into consideration the cost to society of the pollution that you're sending out through your smokestacks, okay? So that, and remember, an external cost or benefit is an uncompensated good or cost that is imparted upon a third party, okay? So it's uncompensated, because if it was compensated, then it would just be a transaction, all right? Okay, so pollution takes private costs, but it doesn't include societal costs to the third party, okay? Now, finally, markets are generally efficient. Typically, they are efficient, and they do move, they're equitable, but occasionally a market can fail, all right? And it's not efficient. Pollution is an example of a market failure, okay? Now, when the market fails, we call it, oddly enough, we call it a market failure, all right? But typically the markets usually are efficient, but they can fail. Something could happen, and then we call it a market failure, all right? All right, class, well, that is about it. I think these are all the high points. Again, I'm sorry we had to end the semester like this. I had a lot of interesting exercises for us for class, and I'm saying goodbye to you now, and I wish you all well. I'm sure you're all going to have great careers, and who knows, maybe we'll see each other again sometime. All right? You take care.